My life is divided in two related issues. One is the continuing work on language acquisition and literacy development, which I regard as one field. It's time we all, I think, understood that first and second language are the same field, that English is a foreign language, English is a second language, foreign language instruction is the same field, and the same principles hold for both. And I've come to the conclusion that communication in general is our field. I've been looking at animal communication to see if that corresponds to the idea of comprehensible input. And so far, it doesn't quite fit, but it comes close enough so you feel something else might be going on. So let me talk about that for a moment, then I'll tell you about the other half.
Please do, yeah, please do.
I found out when I was visiting my son and his family in Athens, Georgia. I was giving a talk at the university. A local professor there told me about a lady who lived in Athens, Georgia, who had the most amazing parrot named Cosmo. And the parrot could, no kidding, speak English impressively. Well, I couldn't visit Cosmo when I was there, but I did make contact with Cosmo's owner, or maybe Cosmo's owner is really Cosmo's pet. I haven't figured out which way it is. Betty Jean Craig. Betty Jean Craig is a retired professor of comparative literature, and she spent 10 years with her parrot. And eventually I did get to visit her, and I wrote a paper about Cosmo. I visited her and brought my grandchildren, who are very interested in this talking bird. They're together all day long.
Huh?
And Betty Jean gives Cosmo what no parrot has ever gotten in the experimental studies, and that is love and affection and constant communication. And Cosmo can talk, and there's absolutely no doubt about it. Betty Jean comes to the cage and says, "Hi Cosmo, how are you?" "Oh, Cosmo, poop." And there Cosmo is poop. "Cosmo, good bird." "Cosmo, poop on cage." Okay? And then sometimes Betty Jean says Cosmo's not such a good bird. Like one time, Cosmo pooped on the floor. "Cosmo, bad bird." "Cosmo, poop on floor." Betty Jean comes over and cleans it up, and Cosmo says, "Wish, wish, all good now." Now, Cosmo's about as good as the chimpanzee washoe is in using sign language. A vocabulary of about 135 words with an elementary syntax about as good as the right brain can do on its own, like a Broca aphasic. Quite interesting, all right? The mature right brain, and definitely makes sense. They've been talking for years and years. The input is comprehensible, it's contextualized, and the affective filter is like 0. But after a while, Cosmo did most of her language acquisition the first 3-4 years. So there's still a lot of stuff to be determined. And there are places here and there where some direct teaching might have happened, or some output plus correction. I've looked at Cosmo, I've looked at some of the other animal language, and the evidence is just as tantalizing, where it seems to have a pretty good but not quite exact fit. So maybe this idea of comprehensible input, we began with adult second language. Then we found it was true for child language, child second language. When I worked with Heidi Dulé and Marina Burt back in the 1842s, whenever it was, then we found it was good for child language acquisition. Then after reading Frank Smith's work and Kenneth Goodman's work, you see it's good for adult literacy, the reading hypothesis. It helped explain bilingual education, and it might even explain animal communication. The next frontier, of course, is when the aliens come. When we are visited from aliens from Zeta Reticula and Alpha Centauri. Of course, Terence McKenna said they're already here. And they came in the form of mushrooms. And if you want to communicate, if you want to communicate, you have to eat the mushrooms and they talk to you. Okay? Of course I wouldn't know, but that's what people tell me. So that's fascinating. And the problem with aliens, if you look at the abduction research and tales of abduction, it looks like it's telepathy. So we're going to be out of work. However, my research, and here's the latest, has determined that the Star Trek Universal Translator probably runs on comprehensible input. I've been examining all the episodes, and it doesn't work on output. It doesn't try things out to see if it's right. It listens to people talk and gradually fills it in. And it has background knowledge because it's got the whole Star Trek computer behind it and all this stuff. It helps that some of the alien languages in the Alpha Quadrant are related, okay? Because they're from similar humanoid, backgrounds. And we know that, Vulcan and the closely related languages, et cetera. So, that gives you a head start. So that's where the research is going to go someday. And we're still working on it with language acquisition. We're still doing, I think, fundamental good research on the reading hypothesis. And we're still getting confirming evidence that is data set up to challenge the theory, see if it's right or not. And so far, it's reading and comprehensible input all the way down is still the most powerful thing we have going.
I wonder if you could develop a little bit more on that. You talked about it today, and I've heard you talk about it before, about sustained silent reading and the advantages of that vis-a-vis traditional TESOL language pedagogy, which is based around grammar, vocabulary sets, and so on.
Yeah, it's still back. We're still back in the 1950s. Going back to Star Trek, I had an interesting incident with that. The latest Star Trek show was Enterprise, came out in the 90s, which is really not up to the level of the other Star Trek. It was like written by junior high school students. The first episode had the captain of the Enterprise look around for a communications officer. And he found Ensign Saito giving a language lesson at Starfleet Academy. He said, this is the one I want. She was teaching an alien language using the audio lingual method. Repeat after me, repetition drill and correction and all that. Oh my gosh, I wrote a letter to Star Trek, to their science dude, and I said, this is 1995. You at least ought to, and you're discussing, you're going to be in the 21st century here, you ought to at least bring the methodology up to the 1990s and look at, TPR, natural approach, and all that. Right now you're back in the 1950s. And I'm afraid, he wrote me back. It was quite nice, and basically told me very politely to mind your own business. We've got a show going on. It was kind of like, we welcome the input of experts. Nevertheless, we do have certain constraints. No, you don't. You could have changed that. Anyway, I think this is representative of what's going on in general. We're still under the old guidelines, the old system. And it's a problem of getting the research around and the evidence, which is now like overwhelming. We've got method comparison stuff, where we have so many comparisons between explicit and implicit methods, between comprehension-based and traditional, in beginning language teaching, intermediate language teaching, using in phonics versus whole language, and I really like whole language when it's done right, it's terrific. Free reading for first language, free reading for second language, and you know what? We've never lost. There's not a single study of the hundreds out there that show that explicit methods are better when we use the right measures. Basically, the only time explicit stuff looks better is when you give people a grammar test and they've been drilled on the rule and they have time to think about the rule, when we meet the conditions for the use of the monitor. And even then, it's a very small difference. When you give people any kind of test of communication, comprehensible input has always won, and it's simply a matter of getting the research around. So one of the studies I talked about, I was trying to bring in the old and the new. Some of the new studies include a major study. Sullivan was the researcher in the UK, which got a lot of publicity, fortunately, on reading. They've done a longitudinal study of children starting at when they were little kids all the way up to age 16. These are first language kids. And they found that free reading, how much reading you've done, is a phenomenal predictor of just about everything. And it's mostly the reading you've done in recent years. The reading you did when you were 10, etc., that counts, but not nearly as powerful. So that means any age, you can do it.
Thanks for that. I wonder if we could move on a little bit and talk about the trend, the worrying trend, I think we share that, towards centralization, national curriculum, Common Core in the US, and reflect on where that's heading and what some of the implications of that are, and the drive to test.
The United States is a good test case because it's very clear what's going on there, and I think it's a similar movement throughout the world, beginning with the Bologna agreements a few years ago, so the universities could have like a standardized curriculum. If you took one semester of Physics 1 in Milan and then Physics 2 in Paris, you could be assured that you'd have, pretty much the same class, same kind of instruction. And in the United States, there was this fear that if you went to school in Kentucky and you moved to Iowa, there would be this, mismatch. Turns out, very few people have ever complained about this. This is an invented problem that has not nearly been a problem. More insidious than that is the belief that has been pushed relentlessly that schools are failing, that teacher preparation is no good, teachers are not doing their job, and every country I have studied claims their test scores are horrible, other countries are doing better, and we have this crisis. It turns out it's not true. The claim is we've got to do something, we've got to get tougher with our kids. We've got to have more tests, we've got to have more rigid teacher training, got to have more rigorous exams to make those lazy students and lazy teachers toe the line, right? So this has been an attack on teachers that's been going on for decades in the United States. The data doesn't support it. The data says there's one factor that overwhelms all the others, and that's poverty. Poverty, by far, is a far more powerful predictor of how well students do on these tests than anything else. It just about wipes out anything else. In fact, in the United States, the United States falls about in the middle, these tests usually. When you control for poverty, the United States is just about at the top, very close compared to just about everyone else. Poverty is the issue. Poverty means nutritional problems. When you don't have enough to eat, you don't have the right kind of food, it's pretty hard to do well in school when you're hungry or undernourished. Poverty means lack of health care. When children are sick, when their teeth hurt, when they can't see the board, the best teaching in the world is not going to make any difference. In the area I've been most active in is access to books. High poverty means fewer books in the home. It means fewer bookstores, can't afford books. It means fewer public libraries, lower quality public libraries, lower quality classroom libraries, lower quality school libraries. So the common sense solution to all this is at least protect children against the effects of poverty, which costs very little. Instead, we're spending the money on testing. The United States has gone crazy in investing in testing. My colleague Diane Ravitch talked to people in the U.S. Department of Ed, and her conclusion was they want to test everything. The plans now are to increase the amount of testing that we have now in the States 20-fold. They want to test preschool to to 12, maybe even the university. There's talk of this. That started with Margaret Spellings in the previous administration. They want to test every child, every subject, and do intermediate tests in the middle as kids are going, okay? The cost of this is going to be gigantic because not just the cost of the test, but they want to do it all online, which is going to be billions immediately to make sure kids have computers and they're up to date on computers, and to keep re-upping the computers, upgrading them, replacing them as things become obsolete, which they do nearly every 3 days now. If you get a new computer, you've got to get it replaced. You can't upgrade it. You need a new one every 3 years. So it is a dream come true for the computer companies. This is all an invention of the private sector. It is all done by committees of people who have never spent a day alone in a room with 10-year-old children. In the United States, it has been heavily financed by the business community. They have appointed a guy named David Coleman in charge of it, who was never taught. He was applied for a teacher job and was turned down, and then became an educational entrepreneur.
Manager.
Exactly. And he's the one who designed this thing. He's now head of the College Board, where he's turning that into an arm of the Common Core Standards. Arne Duncan, the U.S. Secretary of Education. My motto has always been, if you can't say anything good about someone, sit next to me, okay? That's actually Alice Roosevelt. So I think it's important that people know who these people are and who's running the show. The United States Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, has never taught. He got his start in education, so he claims, by working at his mother's tutoring center in Chicago. He went down to play basketball with the inner city kids. He went to Harvard where he was captain of the basketball team and majored in sociology. He then tried to try out for the National Basketball Association and was turned down. Didn't make the cut. Even though he'd averaged 17 points a game, he's a good player. He went off to Australia and played professional basketball for 2 years, where he averaged 20 points a game for 2 years. I have investigated this guy's career. He's good, no question. Good shooter, good moves, good passer, you know, the whole thing. When he came back to Chicago, and this is a kid in his 20s, he was going to college and spent 4 years playing pro basketball. He was immediately appointed the head of an educational foundation, the president. This is simply mentioned with no comment in his bio. In reality, his mom worked with Barack Obama when Obama was a committee organizer. In reality, he plays basketball with the president and the president's brother-in-law regularly. And when he went to University Elementary School, he met a lot of kids who became very influential. And that's how he got the appointment. He moved over after that to Chicago City Schools, where he instituted a lot of reforms that are feel-good, like the lowest 10% of schools, we're going to tear them apart. We're going to fire everybody and rehire, which just totally is ridiculous. It disrupts the community. It's awful. And it's poverty. That's why they're the lowest 10%. It's not the teachers. Teachers are doing heroic stuff a lot of the time. His reward was to go to Washington and impose the same amateurish solutions. I don't know any member of his staff, anyone associated with him who is well-versed in education. The decisions are being made by Duncan and his colleagues in the business community. They are not being made by responsible educators. This is the problem, and now it's being pushed worldwide. In my opinion, the push towards standardization is to make it easier to give examinations. And when we can do it in other countries, as is happening everywhere in the world, it will be easier to test everyone. There is now a movement, I've talked about this on my posts, to test everybody in the entire world. I am not making this up. When Arnie Duncan went to Haiti quite recently, and he was surrounded by very serious poverty, his first comment was, we've got to test these kids to see where they are. This is like a fireman entering a building and being told, you know, there's fire everywhere, and people are dying, and get them out, get this down. This thing, no, you've got to measure the temperature of the fire first. No, you've got to put the fire out. We know what the problems are in communities. Just take a walk through, and you know these kids need health care, they need food, they need shelter, they need a bed at night, all this stuff. And then we're going to do better. I follow Martin Luther King's advice, and the evidence supports Dr. King. Many of our problems, for example, problems in housing and education, will be taken care of when poverty is taken care of. And this is the worldwide problem, and this is the worldwide boondoggle that's going on all over the world. We are told that we have to standardize because we need rigorous tests for kids so they can be ready for the 21st century. No one has any idea what these students are going to need 10 years from now. The world changes. What we need are students who are flexible, who are interested in solving problems, who can find out about things rapidly and develop new skill sets in areas that they're passionate about. I do believe in a small core. We all do. We all want kids to be able to read and write at a certain level. We all want kids to be comfortable with numbers, science, history, at a general level. But beyond that, for me, school is a place where you can find out what you're good at. Because the world is going to need you, whatever your skill happens to be. We cannot prepare for a future that we don't know about. I quote the famous American philosopher, Yogi Berra, who said, it's hard to predict, especially about the future. And right now, I think we're pushing education in a certain direction so it's easier to have standardized tests and easier for a small group to make money. Who pays for these tests? We do. The corporations take absolutely no risk. We pay for the infrastructure. We pay for all the computers. They come in and apply it. If it fails, if there's no improvement, who gets blamed? The teachers. And the answer is more standardization, more rigorous stuff, more technology. This is the problem.
as a final follow-up question to that, I wonder what your reflections are. I think you've articulated very well the concerns of teachers, the concerns of parents, the concerns of researchers. I wonder what your reflections are as to the extent to which this alternative narrative is being listened to by the neoliberal agenda.
Absolutely. It's not being listened to by much of anyone,
Yeah.
and I would like to make a contribution to dealing with the most important problem which you've just brought up, and that is the spread of information. Very few people know what's going on. If I only knew what I read in the papers, I would be on the other side. It's only because I've been a specialist in this for so long that I know what the insights are and the arguments. In fact, half of the American public, if you look at the American public who has not graduated college, half of them have never heard of the Common Core. And these are hard-working people, honest, good, smart people. They've never heard of it because it's not part of their world, all right? If you look at college-educated people, etc., a little more than half know, 60-70%, but very few have any idea of the details. To me, there's a limit with what you can accomplish with newspapers and with the media and politicians. To me, the answer is the internet. In the States, during the Democrats really had a successful internet campaign when Howard Dean nearly got the nomination for the Democrats. It was all done on the internet, moveon.org, which helped President Obama in the 2008 campaign. So I believe in the internet, and I'd like to make a suggestion. If people that are listening to this are going to do one thing, look at one website, SusanOhanian.org. Susan Ohanian, OHANIAN.org. This is the center of gravity, in my opinion, of the resistance. She's taught for 20 years. Got it? She knows. She's taught lots of different levels. She loves teaching. When she was in the classroom, she loved being in the classroom. Her husband, by the way, is Hans Ohanian, who wrote a brilliant biography of Albert Einstein, which basically talked about how hard it was, and, you know, the complex way we do science, and it's not this straight path. It's a brilliant book. Anyway, she wrote a book. Susan Ohanian wrote a book called Whatever Happened to Recess. We're changing recess over to getting rid of it in about 1/3 of the schools for more test prep. So I say, get on her mailing list. When 100,000 people are on her mailing list, all this will dissolve. If people have more time after that, they can follow me on Twitter. I'm trying to catch up to Justin Bieber, okay? Krashen. You can follow I'm on Facebook. And DianeRavitch.net is another good source. Diane Ravitch is a very interesting case, and illustrative of the problems. Diane Ravitch was on the other side. She was one of the architects of No Child Left Behind, and she realized when she saw the results that it wasn't working. She was, I think, Assistant Secretary of State under Republican administrations. And she's quite learned and quite bright, and she's done histories of education and all this. She's come over to this side, and she now has 2 books talking about what's wrong with the reformers' approach. We call them the deformers. And she's quite, what's the word, media savvy. She knows how to use media, and she has a reputation already. So Diane has been on Meet the Press. She's been on PBS. She's been in MSNBC. Oh my gosh, she's been in the New York Review of Books, the New York Times. She gives lectures. Thousands of people come to lectures. And you know what? She's really good. And she really states the case very well. She's getting nowhere. It's like ignored, like it never happened. And she has had public relations success like none of us have had. And even Diane, who's so sharp, and she's like 76 now. This is not a career move. I mean, she's really playing it straight. She's absolutely brilliant. And it hasn't penetrated the public consciousness yet, let alone being the consciousness of policymakers. So this is an illustration of how hard it is. I do follow the words, though, of John Wooden, former UCLA basketball coach. Don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can do. So take a look at Susan Ohanian, pass it on to your friends.
And on that insight, thank you very much, Stephen Krashen.
Thank you so much, Hugh.